you know.
That's the fascinating thing. The soldiers really don't have the political aspect of it all. They're just fighting.
No, and you know what? When you're there, you don't have time,
Yeah.
and you don't have mental time. I mean, your minutes of every day are occupied with survival, and with you're trying to accomplish the mission and survive. Accomplish the mission and survive. You don't have time to sit around at night around a campfire and debate the politics of the Vietnam War. And do you really think that the domino effect is the appropriate analysis? Never even entered my mind. It didn't matter. Our goal was to conclude our tour, accomplish our mission, and come back to the world. We called coming home the world, because where we were was not the world. It was like a different dimension. I mean, things were happening, and you saw and did things there that the only way you could deal with them, or the way I could deal with them, was to put them in a different compartment, and have it in a place and in a way that you could walk away from it and come back to what was your real life, your normal life. And I think that's why a lot of Vietnam veterans maybe haven't done well, is they didn't have the ability to compartmentalize and to separate that. As I said, many men are still fighting the Vietnam War today,
Yeah,
medically or mentally.
Same thing with the Iraq War too, coming back.
Oh, I think even more so in some ways, just because of the advanced technology of warfare. We're having so many more close-head injuries and traumatic brain injuries and things like that. The vast majority of the wounded in Vietnam were gunshot. They were not, and then secondarily we had booby traps, but we had nothing on the scale of IEDs that could kill 20 at a crack. So it's a very different level of technology in the war. I'm sorry to say, but men are still dying and being killed, wounded. Not changing.
Well, what did you know that was going on back home, being millions of miles away, like you said, in another dimension?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we certainly knew. Look, it's interesting to think of the communication we have right now in Afghanistan, for instance. A young man can be out in the field all day in a combat zone and then come back to his hooch or his bunker and get on a computer and Skype with his parents in real time. Not only talk to your parents or your girlfriend or your wife or your kids, but see them. And when I was in Vietnam, this was another way that we felt we weren't in the world. If we were, so many thousand miles away, and the only communication was by mail. We couldn't pick up a cell phone. They weren't invented. We couldn't use a telephone. We didn't have satellite phones. You wrote a letter. I wrote a letter to my parents, and it took 12 days to get home. And then my dad or mom wrote back, and it took 12 more days for me to get their response. So the turnaround time for communication was 24 days. And that certainly contributed to the feeling of isolation. You knew you were on the other side of the world, and you were. The kids today in Afghanistan, they get like a liberty or a leave, and the government flies them home for a week or two. That was bizarre. I went to Sydney, Australia. It was about 4 hours away by airplane, and that's where I had 5 days of R&R. But now these kids come home. So, I knew that my parents and my family supported me, and I knew that the majority of the media didn't support the war. And again, I was there in 1970, and the tide turned, if you will, in terms of public sentiment, I would say in 1968. Following Tet, Walter Cronkite, and everything, that this war is probably lost, public sentiment changed, so that the whole time I was there, I knew that the majority of the press was against the war, and a large percentage of the population was against the war, and yet I was there, and I had to do what I had to do. So it was, that was not pleasant. At least these kids today know that the majority of the American people support them and support what they do. And many times I didn't feel we had the support of either. Not only of the war or the conflict, but the warriors. We were treated so poorly. So
you bring up a really interesting point there of the media giving their own perspective on the war.
Yeah.
And I've heard lots of ideas saying we could have necessarily won the war by technical standards if we kept fighting. And I argue that maybe it was even the media that lost us the war by changing the perception of how it was back home.
Oh, boy, that's a complicated analysis. Look, technologically, could we have won that war militarily? Absolutely.
Yeah.
In fact, I think most historians would agree that in terms of the level of military conflict, the United States and believe it or not, South Korea had troops there. South Korean Marines fought, and Australians had troops on the ground in Vietnam. United States forces never really lost a particular military engagement in Vietnam. It became a war of attrition, and it became a battle of will, if you will. And the North Vietnamese people and Ho Chi Minh as their leader had as their goal just bleeding the United States, as they had done the French. You know, this was their country. They could hang on. They could continue to resist, and hopefully they would break the spirit of the American people, and the American involvement would end. And that's exactly what happened. We didn't withdraw from Vietnam because we were defeated militarily. We were defeated, if you will, politically. I think this country lost its will to continue that endeavor. Could we have not withdrawn and stayed militarily and actually emerged from the war with a totally free and democratic South Vietnam? Yes. Was there going to be an incremental cost?
Oh, yeah.
Yes. Was this country, in terms of its public psyche, ready to go another year or two or three and commit hundreds and hundreds of thousands of more troops and maybe 10 or 20,000 more deaths? No. This country lost its resolve and lost its will. And the military does what the civilians tell us to. And ultimately, when that political tide turned, and whether it was influenced by the media, sure it was. The anti-war movement. Ultimately, this country made a decision. President Nixon decided to withdraw the troops, and that's what happened. We came home. And you know, I remember some World War II guys. My dad introduced me to some World War II veterans in the VFW post when I got back. And I had World War II guys tell me, "Oh, you're a Vietnam veteran?" I say, "Yeah." I say, "Oh, you're the guys that lost the war." No, we didn't. We didn't lose the war. You know, the military, I think, are pretty protective of that. But this country decided to discontinue it without success.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. And there's even that idea of the war didn't end until 1975, the fall of Saigon. And we pulled out in 1973.
Right.
We weren't even there when the war was over.
Right,
If we
exactly.
stayed, it could have completely been won.
Yeah, and when the decision was made to withdraw, then it was, you know, Katie bar the door. It was with the last GI here, please turn out the lights.
Yeah.
You know, and we really left the South Vietnamese, you know, if they were truly our ally for all those years, we left them in a lurch, and it didn't take North Vietnam long to militarily conquer that country once we were effectively gone. So, you know, we did a disservice to our allies, our ally.
Well, what were your feelings when you heard you were going home?
I remember I was on a hilltop, and I got a radio call from my colonel, and he said, you know, "Lieutenant, get on the next helicopter off your hill," because this is a very remote hilltop, and you can only get on and off by helicopter. He said, "I want you to come into the rear area, come off your base. There's something I want to talk to you about." So I said, "Oh, Jesus, you know, he's going to send me to another hill," because I still had a little bit of time left. I came back, and he asked me, "How's it going out there?" I told him, and he said, his name was Colonel Rudzis, I remember his name, and he said, "Are your shots up to date? You know, your medical shots." I said, "What?" He said, "Your shots. Are your shots up to date?" "I don't know. I've been here a year. I don't know." "Why do you ask, sir?" And he said, "How soon could you pack to go home?" And I said, you know, "Sir, please don't F with me." I said that on the video. "Please," I thought he was pulling my leg and joking. And he said, "No." He said, "We are getting orders to start to reduce the number of Marines, and you've been here one of the longest. And if you can get ready, you're going to be on an airplane tomorrow."
Wow.
And I mean, I literally was I didn't go back to the hill. I was packed, and within about 15 hours I was on an airplane, and 2 days later I landed in after a couple stops I landed in San Francisco and called my father, and you know, it was head turning, because I hadn't processed yet that I was going to come out of that. I just figured I'd have another month or two, you know, just keep it going. You know, we made it this far. I had no idea I would be out of there in a heartbeat, and all of a sudden I was back in the world, and it was, I remember it, I was overwhelmed with everything, signs, lights, sounds. It was so different. I mean, it was just like coming into another planet for a couple weeks. I couldn't really acclimate because I just had been from being on this grungy hilltop for 7 months, you know, and not having a bath for 7 months, you know, and eating canned food that was manufactured in 1945 in World War II, to now you're home and you can walk into a bar and get a beer and you can get a steak and go to a movie and drive in a car and oh, by the way, nobody's going to shoot at you. You know, it was otherworldly. And I'm sure these kids in Iraq and Afghanistan have the same experience. The reacclimation is just difficult. Some people don't make it. They don't make the reassimilation, I think, into their life. So I think I did. We'll see.
What's the first thing you did when you came home?
You know, I don't remember. I think it was a blur. You know, I landed in San Francisco and I called my father, then I called my girlfriend, who's now my wife, and my dad started crying because he thought I was in the hospital. And a day later, I was on an airplane, and I came back to Detroit, Michigan, and had 30 days at home, and saw all my friends and drank beer, and said, you know, I made it through that. You know, I think I got life by the ass now. So. And then I still had a year, about a year and a half in the Marine Corps, so I had to report back for duty, and then I did training duty and trained other groups of young Marines that were getting ready to go to what I had just come back from, and they use your experience to hopefully, you know, give them a better chance of surviving it. And then I got out in '72 and went to law school, and I've been a lawyer ever since.
Well, thank you very much.
Sure.
It's an honor to meet you.
Okay. Alex, good to see you.
Yes, sir.
Okay.